In the shadows of Ridgefield's night, a SEAL team cries, no help in sight. Ignored by command, alone they fight, until the sniper turns the tide quiet, precise, and right. Asterisk if you love stories of courage, skill, and triumph against all odds. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an epic story like this one. Now, let's dive into the incredible true tale of bravery in the shadows. The morning sun stretched over the sleepy town of Ridgefield, Illinois, casting long shadows across the military base at its edge. To outsiders, it seemed like any ordinary suburban corner. Manicured lawns, neat houses, the distant hum of early traffic. But the base pulsed with a quiet intensity, a rhythm known only to those who had sworn to protect the country in ways the public rarely saw. Among those stationed there, one figure moved with a mixture of grace and quiet determination that often went unnoticed: Lieutenant Ava Chandler. At 29, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen far too much to be fazed by gossip or doubt. Yet she was no stranger to being underestimated. Chandler, right? A burly instructor called, his voice tinged with barely concealed amusement as she walked into the small tactical briefing room. Yes, sir, Ava replied, her tone crisp, professional. Thought so, he said, smirking. We almost didn't expect a female to volunteer for the sniper program. Don't worry, we won't hold it against you. Too much. The comment hit with a familiar sting. Ava didn't flinch, though the words lingered, a reminder that she had always had to prove herself twice over. She had heard this before, the sideways glances, the whispered doubts, the quiet skepticism of peers who assumed she couldn't measure up in the field. Ava had grown up in a family that believed in doing the right thing, no matter the cost. Her father, a retired Marine, had instilled in her the lessons of discipline, patience, and observation. But it was her mother's quiet strength that had shaped her emotional resilience. She had learned early that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting in spite of it. And today, she would need every ounce of that courage. The base was a maze of gray concrete buildings, wire fences, and the ever-present hum of helicopters waiting for deployment. Ava walked past rows of vehicles and storage units toward the armory. Today's mission briefings were unusual, and alert had come in, far more urgent than the usual routine exercises. The room was tense when she entered. A SEAL team, deployed on a classified mission along the East Coast, had issued a distress call. The details were scarce, almost intentionally vague, but the urgency was unmistakable. Communications had gone dark after the initial call, and Command was struggling to locate them. Command, Ava heard one officer mutter, we don't have a lot of options here. Extraction teams are stretched thin. It's complicated. Ava's pulse quickened. She didn't allow it to show. Her mind began running through the tactical possibilities, every nuance she had learned over years of training. This was her element, and yet the murmured doubts echoed in her mind. She could sense the unspoken skepticism around her. Could a young female sniper really handle a live extraction scenario when others had failed to respond? You'll be leading the overwatch, the commanding officer said finally, looking directly at her. You're the best shot we have for long-range engagement. This isn't a drill, Chandler. Lives are at stake. The words should have thrilled her, but instead, a familiar weight settled in her chest. She was trusted with responsibility, yes, but everyone else assumed she would fail. It wasn't malicious, it was habit, ingrained in a culture that had rarely allowed someone like her to shine. I understand. Sir? Ava replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the doubt that threatened to creep in. The next hours were a blur of preparation, checking scopes, calibrating rifles, memorizing terrain maps, and running simulations in the small, dimly lit war room. Every movement was deliberate, every decision weighed with precision. She moved past colleagues who whispered under their breath, mocking her or questioning her capabilities, and focused on what mattered, the lives of men depending on her eyes and her aim got as she loaded her rifle, the weight of it familiar in her hands. Ava felt a flicker of doubt, the kind that came not from fear, but from knowing the stakes were impossibly high. The SEAL team was out there, somewhere in the dense forested area along the coast, pinned down and unseen. Every minute that passed without action increased the risk of casualties. Finally, the convoy of helicopters prepared for insertion. Ava climbed into the observation post atop a hill overlooking the potential engagement zone. The wind cut cold across her face, carrying the scent of wet pine and soil. She adjusted her scope and scanned the horizon, every muscle in her body attuned to the environment. She was alone at her post, but that solitude only sharpened her senses. Hours passed. The radio crackled intermittently, carrying fragmented messages. From the field, garbled transmissions that made her stomach tighten. Command was still struggling to locate the SEAL team, and frustration began to ripple through the base. Others had given up hope, assuming the worst. Ava refused. Every fiber of her being screamed that she could find them, that she could be the difference between life and death. She remembered the lessons her father had drilled into her: patience, observation, and unwavering resolve. And now she would put them to the ultimate test. As dusk settled, shadows lengthened across the landscape. Ava adjusted her scope and caught the faintest glimmer of movement, a flash of a uniform, a shadow darting between trees. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with focus. She had found them. The SEAL team was alive, but they were surrounded, outnumbered, trapped, and worse, the usual channels of support had failed them. No reinforcements were coming. Ava took a deep breath, steadying herself. The whispers of doubt and mockery from the morning were gone, replaced by a single clarity. She was the lifeline. She would not fail. From the shadows of the hill, she began to move, every step calculated, every action precise. The night was her ally, the scope her extension, and her courage the force that would tip the scales. She was underestimated. She had been mocked. And now, from the darkness, she would prove herself beyond question. The night stretched ahead, filled with danger and uncertainty. But Ava Chandler, sniper, observer, guardian, would not falter. The lives of the SEAL team depended on her, and she was ready to meet the moment silent, unseen, and unstoppable. The night had settled fully over Ridgefield's outskirts, wrapping the forest in a thick, suffocating darkness. From her vantage point on the ridge, Ava Chandler felt the weight of solitude pressing against her chest. Every shadow could conceal danger. Every rustle of leaves might signal an enemy, and every heartbeat reminded her that the SEAL team below depended on her focus. She adjusted the scope on her rifle again, eyes scanning the dense canopy. Through the darkness, she spotted movement. A brief shimmer of a helmet, a flash of a tactical vest slipping between trees. Her breath slowed, her heartbeat steadied. The SEALs were still alive, but pinned down, moving cautiously, their survival. Hanging by a thread. Command had left them exposed, and for a moment, anger flared inside her. How could trained soldiers, backed by the might of the U.S. military, be ignored when they needed help most? But Ava pushed the rage aside. There was no time for bitterness. There was only precision, observation, and action. Her mind went over the tactical possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. The enemy was likely watching the perimeter, waiting for reinforcements to arrive, assuming the SEAL team had no backup. She had a narrow window to intervene without exposing herself. Every miscalculation could be fatal. Ava made her first move. She repositioned along a shadowed ridge, using the terrain to her advantage. Her boots sank into the soft soil, muffling her steps. The weight of the rifle was familiar, comforting even as she moved silently. An unseen guardian in the night. Suddenly, the radio crackled a weak, garbled transmission from the SEAL team. "This is Echo 6. We're pinned, need extraction. No visual on support." Ava tightened her jaw. The voices were strained, edged with exhaustion and fear, but there was also determination. She recognized it. This was the same unbreakable will that had carried her through years of sniper training. She responded softly, knowing her voice had to carry authority and calm. "This is Lieutenant Chandler. I've got eyes on your position. Stay low. Don't move until you hear my signal." Silence followed, then a faint acknowledgement. For hours she watched, waited, and calculated. The enemy moved in small groups, unaware that a shadowy figure above them had the power to change the outcome of the night. Ava's patience was tested beyond anything she had endured during her rigorous training. Every second stretched, each one an invisible thread holding life and death together. Then came the first engagement. A patrol moved closer to the SEAL's position, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Ava's pulse was calm, methodical. She steadied her rifle, checked her windage and elevation, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was precise, silent in the night, but devastating in its effect. One enemy was neutralized before he could raise an alarm knot below. The SEALs didn't know the danger had passed, but Ava allowed herself a fleeting surge of satisfaction. She had proven her first point. Underestimated though she was the lifeline that command had failed to provide. Yet the night was far from over. Movement in the trees hinted at reinforcements for the enemy. Ava adjusted her scope again, tracking multiple targets. Her training kicked in, muscles and mind operating in perfect synchrony. Each shot had to be deliberate, each action planned for maximum effect. She was no longer just a sniper. She was the guardian in the shadows, the unseen hand that tipped the scales in favor of the trapped team. But even as she fought, doubt lingered at the edges of her mind. The men below had no idea who was protecting them. Would they ever respect the woman who had saved their lives from the darkness? Would command recognize her role, or would they dismiss it as luck? Ava couldn't dwell on that now. Survival was the only currency that mattered. Hours passed, marked only by the sporadic reports from the SEALs and the rhythm of her rifle clicks. Exhaustion crept in, her body protesting after long hours of immobility and tension. Yet she refused to move, refused to falter. Every second mattered. Every hesitation could cost lives. At last, the SEAL team began to reposition, moving toward a narrow clearing that offered a possible escape route. Ava's heart clenched with worry. The path was exposed, a perfect line for the enemy to intercept them. She calculated angles, distances, and timing, her mind racing faster than her heart. Ava's voice came through the radio again, steady and authoritative. "Move on my mark. 1, 2, 3. The team surged forward as she provided covering. Fire, her bullets striking with lethal accuracy, silencing threats before they could reach the SEALs. The clearing was dangerous, but with Ava's guidance, they made it across without casualties. Finally, the first signs of extraction appeared in the distance. A pair of helicopters breaking through the night sky, lights cutting through the dark. Like lighthouses of salvation. Ava's chest tightened with relief, though she didn't allow herself to celebrate just yet. The operation was only half complete. The SEALs were still vulnerable until they were safely aboard as the team climbed. Into the choppers, one of them, a grizzled veteran named Lieutenant Harris, caught a glimpse of the ridge. His eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows. "Who's covering us?" He muttered to the pilot. Ava stayed hidden, a silent guardian in the darkness. She didn't need recognition. She only needed them alive. The helicopters lifted, carrying the SEAL team to safety. Ava remained on the ridge until the last aircraft vanished into the night, the adrenaline of the engagement fading into bone-deep exhaustion. She finally allowed herself to breathe, muscles trembling, but spirit unbroken. In the aftermath, as she packed her gear and descended the ridge, whispers of disbelief reached her ears. Some of the officers who had doubted her were stunned, others silent with begrudging respect. Ava's presence alone had turned the tide. She had been underestimated, mocked, and dismissed, but she had succeeded where others had hesitated. A sense of triumph was tinged with frustration. Command had ignored the SOS for too long. Lives had been at risk not because of lack of skill or courage, but because of bureaucracy, oversight, and prejudice. Ava knew that the fight wasn't over, not yet. The real battle would be to ensure that the truth of the night's events was recognized, that justice and respect were earned beyond whispers in shadowed corridors. As dawn broke over Ridgefield, Ava Chandler returned to base, weary but unbroken. The town, the forest, and the ridge behind her were quiet once more, but the echoes of the night's struggle lingered. She had fought, she had saved lives, and she had proven silently, invisibly, that courage and skill were not defined by expectation. And in the hours ahead, she knew she would face the next challenge, turning her invisible triumph into undeniable truth. The morning after the operation was a strange kind of quiet. Ridgefield's streets were alive with routine, unaware of the night's near catastrophe. Ava Chandler returned to the base, exhausted but alert, her uniform creased from hours of tension and movement in the shadows. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, not from fatigue alone, but from the anticipation of what awaited her. In the debriefing room, senior officers sat behind polished desks, waiting for reports. The air smelled faintly of coffee and ink, a sharp contrast to the wet pine and soil of the ridge where she had spent the previous night. Lieutenant Chandler, began Colonel Matthews, his voice measured, almost clinical. We've received preliminary reports about the situation with Echo 6. Can you walk us through your actions? Ava cleared her throat and began. She described her observations, her decisions, and the methodical support she had provided. She detailed how she had located the SEAL team, coordinated their movement, and neutralized threats from her overwatch position. She spoke calmly, deliberately, every word precise. As she spoke, she noticed the eyes in the room. Some were neutral, calculating, as if weighing her words against preconceived notions. Others, she realized, were subtly skeptical officers who had dismissed her the day before, now straining to reconcile her competence with their assumptions. When she finished, a silence lingered. It was not the respectful pause of recognition, but the cautious hesitation of those unaccustomed to seeing someone like her succeed so decisively. Colonel Matthews finally broke the silence. Your report is thorough. However, communications logs and external verification still need to be confirmed. Protocol dictates that actions in such situations must be corroborated before any commendation or acknowledgement is issued. Ava's jaw tightened. She had expected this. The bureaucracy of command was like a wall high, cold, and unyielding. Her skills had saved lives, but in the rigid hierarchy, proof and precedent often mattered more than courage or results. Yes, sir, she said, voice steady. I understand. Outside the room, whispers followed her. Some were subtle, sympathetic, others edged with doubt. She was lucky, one officer murmured. Anyone could have. Ava didn't hear the rest. She had learned early that the opinions of those unwilling to see truth were distractions, and she refused to be distracted. What mattered now was persistence, documenting every observation, every shot, every movement she had made, and ensuring that the record reflected reality, not assumptions. Her quarters offered little solace. The room was small, bare except for a cot, a desk, and a single window overlooking the base perimeter. Ava sat at the desk, reviewing her notes and sketches, her fingers tracing the terrain she had memorized. She thought of the SEAL team, their lives saved, their gratitude unspoken, but real. That knowledge grounded her, but it also stirred frustration. How could heroism be invisible simply because it challenged expectations? Her solitude was broken by a soft knock at the door. Lieutenant Chandler? It was Lieutenant Harris, the grizzled SEAL veteran she had aided the night before. "Mind if I come in?" "Of course," Ava replied, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Harris sat, leaning back, the weight of sleepless nights etched into his face. "I wanted to make sure you knew something," he said, voice low. "We all saw what you did. Out there, you were the difference. Every man on my team would have." He paused, shaking his head. "We owe you. And not just for saving us. You proved something they didn't want to see. That skill isn't measured by gender or appearances or anything like that." Ava felt a flicker of warmth in her chest, a rare affirmation. Yet she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That means more than you know." He nodded, studying her with a respect that bypassed formalities. "Don't let the brass get to you. They'll take their time recognizing it, but they can't ignore what happened. And eventually, they'll have to listen." Despite the encouragement, Ava knew the road ahead would be fraught. Recognition was rarely immediate, especially for someone who challenged the norms of a deeply ingrained system. She would have too. Fight quietly, strategically, relentlessly, not for praise, but for justice and truth. Over the next few days, the tension on the base was palpable. Ava's colleagues treated her with a mixture of curiosity and restrained skepticism. Some offered congratulations in muted tones. Others avoided acknowledgement altogether. Every interaction was a test of her patience, a reminder that competence alone was not always enough to overcome prejudice. Ava also began to notice subtle signs of resentment. One officer, previously dismissive, went out of his way to challenge her assessments during briefings. Another, who had mocked her early in the sniper program, questioned her decisions in private conversations with superiors. At first, Ava considered confrontation, but she quickly realized that the real power lay not in argument, but in persistence and demonstration. She would let results speak louder than words. Let her actions rewrite assumptions over time. Amid these struggles, Ava found solace in preparation. She trained rigorously, refining her technique, simulating extraction scenarios, and building her endurance. The Ridge had taught her the importance of patience, observation, and precision, and she applied those lessons relentlessly. Yet the emotional weight remained. She carried the memory of the SEAL team pinned down, of their vulnerability and reliance on her unseen guidance. She felt a mix of pride and responsibility, knowing that while the immediate threat had passed, the world they served in was filled with invisible battles, and she had just begun to navigate them. Then came a turning point, a quiet moment that shifted the balance of perception. A video feed from the field, recorded by a body camera of a SEA, operative, captured a fraction of her actions. The precise shots, the tactical guidance, the silent control of the battlefield from her overwatch position. When the feed was reviewed by senior officers, there was no room left for doubt. Colonel Matthews called her into the office. His expression was measured, but softened, the first glimpse of acknowledgement she had seen from him. "Lieutenant Chandler, it appears your report is accurate. The footage confirms your role. Exceptional performance." Ava inclined her head, keeping her composure. "Thank you, sir. You've set a standard," he continued, "not just for skill, but for leadership under pressure. I expect thee. Record to reflect this, and I'll ensure command is aware of your contribution. It was a small victory, but significant. Recognition, even delayed, was a step toward justice and equality. Ava felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that respect must still be earned continuously. That evening, as she walked along the perimeter, the sun sinking low behind the base, Ava allowed herself a moment of reflection. The night's battle had been won, but the war for acknowledgement and equality continued. She had faced doubt, mockery, and institutional hesitation, and yet she remained unbroken. Her eyes traced the horizon, imagining the SEAL team now safe, their journey continuing thanks to her vigilance. And in that vision, she found renewed purpose. The shadows would always be part of her world, a place where skill and courage intersected. And from those shadows, she would continue to act, to fight, and to prove that strength and competence were not defined by the expectations of others, but by the courage to act when it mattered most. Ava Chandler had turned the tide once. Challenge now was ensuring the world recognized it, even when the echoes of the night faded. And she was ready. The weeks after the Echo 6 mission were a lesson in patience, frustration, and quiet perseverance. Ava Chandler returned to her duties with unwavering professionalism, but the base's corridors whispered with half-formed judgments. Some officers were reluctant to acknowledge her contributions publicly, while others seemed intent on testing her at every opportunity. One morning, Ava was summoned to a meeting that would test both her skill and her resolve. She entered the office of Major Reynolds, a man whose reputation for strict adherence to protocol was matched only by his resistance to challenges from unexpected sources. Lieutenant Chandler, he began, his tone neutral but carrying a hint. Oath, condescension. Your recent performance has drawn attention. However, before we discuss commendations, we need to review another mission scenario. This one will test your decision-making under extreme conditions. Ava nodded, understanding the unspoken undertone. It wasn't just a test of skill, it was a challenge to her credibility, an attempt to see if luck or accident had carried her during the previous engagement. She didn't flinch. Years of discipline had prepared her for scrutiny. The simulation was grueling. Ava worked through it methodically, her mind sharp, her decisions precise. She coordinated support units, calculated angles and distances, and anticipated enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. By the end, she had completed the scenario flawlessly. Yet when the results were reviewed, Major Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Impressive," he said finally. "But I expect consistency in field reports and corroboration from other units. We cannot base commendations solely on simulation performance." Ava bit back the retort that rose to her lips. She had expected this. Recognition would not come easily. It would require persistence, patience, and undeniable proof. She had already learned that courage and competence were often invisible to those unwilling to see them not as she left the office. A group of younger officers whispered behind her back. "She's lucky," one muttered. "Nobody moves like that." Under pressure, Ava held her head high, refusing to respond. She had learned that arguing with prejudice rarely changed minds. Only consistent results could. That evening, she returned to her quarters to find a letter slipped under her door. The handwriting was neat, precise, unfamiliar. She opened it carefully. "Lieutenant Chandler, I saw your actions during the Echo 6 mission. You saved lives that night, and your skill and composure were extraordinary. Not everyone will recognize your contributions, but know that some of us do. If you ever need guidance or support navigating the bureaucracy, I am available. Ava." Read the note twice, absorbing the words. It was a small acknowledgement, anonymous yet meaningful. It reminded her that even in a system resistant to change, allies existed quiet, observant individuals who recognized merit without prejudice. The following weeks were a balancing act. Ava continued rigorous training, refining her skills in marksmanship, observation, and strategy. She began mentoring younger recruits, especially women who had entered the program under the same skeptical eyes that had followed her. Through patient guidance, she shared both technical expertise and the lessons she had learned about perseverance, resilience, and dignity under scrutiny. Yet the frustration of invisibility lingered. Ava had saved lives, demonstrated exceptional skill, and endured scrutiny, but recognition remained elusive. Command had begun documenting her achievements, but public acknowledgement lagged behind. She could sense the subtle resistance in the air, whispers of lucky shot or fluke success that threatened to undermine her credibility. One night, while reviewing reconnaissance photos and mission reports, Ava felt a familiar tension settle in her shoulders. The weight of responsibility pressed down, heavier than the rifle slung across her back or the gear strapped to her chest. She thought of the SEAL team, the men she had protected, the lives she had influenced without their knowledge or command's acknowledgement. She allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection, a fleeting flicker of doubt. But doubt did not hold her. Ava had learned long ago that strength was not the absence of fear, but the courage to act despite it. She returned to her notes, reanalyzing every movement, every shot, every decision from the Echo 6 mission. She meticulously documented her actions, preparing a comprehensive record for submission to command. Days later, she presented her dossier to Colonel Matthews. The files were detailed, precise, and irrefutable. They included maps, photographs, communications logs, and field notes proof of her decisions and their direct impact on the SEAL team's survival. Colonel Matthews reviewed the materials carefully, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he looked up. "This is thorough. Exceptional work, Lieutenant. It will be included in the official record, and I will ensure that the appropriate recognition is considered." Ava felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't the public acknowledgement she had hoped for, but it was a step toward justice. Recognition in her field would come slowly, measured by documentation and bureaucracy rather than whispers and rumors. Even so, she knew the battle wasn't over. Command could record her achievements, but she still faced the subtle resistance of those unwilling to accept that skill and courage could defy their assumptions. She had been underestimated, mocked, and ignored, but each challenge strengthened her resolve. In the quiet hours before dawn, Ava walked the perimeter again, reflecting on the lessons she had learned. Courage, she realized, was not just a matter of battlefield skill. It was the patience to endure, the persistence to document truth, and the moral clarity to act in service of justice. Even when unseen, she looked out over the ridge, imagining the SEAL team safe and moving forward. And in that moment, she understood something fundamental. Her mission extended beyond saving lives in the field. It included confronting bias, challenging assumptions, and carving a path for others who might follow. Ava Chandler had already proven her worth in the shadows. Now, she would ensure that the truth of her courage would not remain hidden there forever. The weeks following her dossier submission were tense. Ava Chandler moved through the base with a quiet determination, but the subtle undercurrents of scrutiny and skepticism never fully disappeared. Officers who had once ignored her existence now watched her closely, their gazes laced with a mixture of curiosity, doubt, and in some cases, resentment. She had learned to navigate these silent battles, but the toll on her emotional state was real. One morning, she received an unexpected summons to meet with Major Reynolds. The man who had previously tested her skills and questioned her credibility now regarded her with an inscrutable expression. "Lieutenant Chandler," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "there's a situation that requires your immediate attention." A training exercise simulating hostage extraction has gone off schedule. Command has requested your expertise on the matter." Ava nodded. She knew this was more than a test. It was an opportunity to prove that her skills were not isolated to one night or one mission. She accepted without hesitation. Arriving at the simulated operation site, she saw chaos disguised as training. Teams moved clumsily, communication faltering. It was obvious that without direction, the exercise would fail. Ava stepped forward. "Listen." "Up," she commanded, voice firm and calm. "We're not improvising. Follow my lead. Observation, positioning, timing, everything matters. Trust the process. Trust each other, and trust me." Her words cut through the confusion. Soldiers hesitated, then began to follow her guidance. Her instructions were precise, her timing flawless. Each movement she suggested was calculated to maximize safety and effectiveness. Slowly, the exercise began to coalesce under her direction. Major Reynolds watched silently, his expression unreadable. Ava ignored the scrutiny, focused entirely on orchestrating the operation. She felt the familiar rush of responsibility, the adrenaline that came from controlling a scenario where lives, even simulated, hung in the balance dot. By the end of the exercise, the results were undeniable. The operation was executed with precision, casualties avoided, and objectives achieved efficiently. Her colleagues, previously skeptical, could no longer deny her competence. Even some of the officers who had mocked her now offered grudging nods of respect. Yet Ava knew that respect earned through demonstration was fragile. Recognition in her world required more than a single successful operation. It demanded persistence, resilience, and the courage to confront institutional inertia. That night, as she returned to her quarters, a message awaited her. It was from an anonymous source within the chain of command, confirming that her Echo 6 report had been forwarded to senior leadership, along with a recommendation for commendation. Ava allowed herself a rare private smile. Justice, even delayed, was on its way, but her relief was short-lived. The next morning, she encountered resistance she had not anticipated. A group of senior officers openly challenged her decisions during a strategic briefing, questioning her judgment, her analysis, even the validity of her documented actions. Their tone was sharp, edged with condescension. Ava took a deep breath. She had faced doubt and mockery before, but this was different. It was institutional, systemic, and public. She could have argued or reacted emotionally, but she knew that would play into their hands. Instead, she responded with calm authority, presenting her data, referencing her detailed reports, and demonstrating the logic behind her decisions. Room grew silent. Even her harshest critics could not dispute the evidence. Ava's composure, clarity, and unwavering focus began to shift the balance. The officers who had doubted her were forced to acknowledge, at least internally, that she had earned her place through merit, not luck or circumstance. Still, the emotional cost weighed heavily. Ava found herself retreating into quiet moments of reflection, contemplating the sacrifices she had made. The long hours, the isolation, the constant scrutiny, all of it had demanded resilience she had sometimes doubted she possessed. And yet, she had endured, driven by a sense of duty and an unshakable commitment to justice. Her thoughts returned to the SEAL team. Their lives had been saved, but only because she had acted decisively in the shadows. That memory fueled her resolve. Recognition was important, yes, but it was secondary to the fundamental principle that competence, courage, and integrity must be honored. Even when inconvenient or unexpected, the breakthrough came when a senior review board convened to examine the Echo 6 operation. Ava presented her comprehensive report, answered every question with precision, and provided corroborating evidence from multiple sources, including the body cam footage and field notes. By the end of the session, The board's members were unanimous. Ava Chandler had not only performed exceptionally, but she had also demonstrated leadership, strategic thinking, and emotional resilience under extreme pressure. Recommendations were made for formal commendation, and a memo was sent to higher command emphasizing her role in the successful extraction of Echo 6. For Ava, the recognition was not just personal, it was a statement to the institution. Skill and courage, regardless of gender or preconceived bias, could not be ignored indefinitely. The victory was bittersweet. She had fought long and hard for acknowledgement, and the scars of doubt, mockery, and systemic resistance would linger. But she had prevailed, not through force or anger, but through discipline, precision, and unwavering integrity. That evening, as she stood on the ridge overlooking Ridgefield, Ava allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. The town lay beneath her, serene and unaware of the battles that had taken place both in the shadows of the forest and within the corridors of command. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and resistance, and emerged stronger, more capable, and more determined than ever. Her phone buzzed a message from Lieutenant Harris. "Well done, Chandler. You earned it. Not just the commendation, but our respect. You showed what true courage looks like." Ava smiled, feeling the weight of the past weeks begin to lift. She had proven herself not only as a sniper and strategist, but as a leader and advocate for justice. The path had been arduous, filled with emotional and professional challenges. Yet she had navigated it with the same precision and clarity she had shown on the ridge that night. The shadows had tested her. The system had tested her. And through it all, Ava Chandler had remained unbroken, steadfast, and resolute as night fell once more over Ridgefield. She knew the fight for recognition and justice was ongoing, but she had taken the first decisive step, and she would not stop until her truth, and the truth of those she protected, could no longer be ignored. The morning sun cut through the blinds of Ava Chandler's quarters, painting the room in warm, golden stripes. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of calm, a quiet anticipation that something important was about to shift. The base had been tense with the undercurrent of unresolved recognition, but today, that tension would finally resolve. Colonel Matthews had requested a meeting, a formal acknowledgement of her actions during the Echo 6 mission. Ava dressed carefully, her uniform immaculate, the weight of responsibility mingling with a rare thrill of anticipation. She knew the meeting was more than ceremonial. It was a turning point, not just for her career, but for the subtle culture of the base itself. The conference room was bright and intimidating, lined with senior officers and a few members of the media liaison team. Ava entered and stood at attention. The room fell silent. She felt the eyes of those who had doubted her, those who had whispered and questioned, and even those who had quietly supported her. She held her gaze steady, exuding calm confidence. Colonel Matthews rose, clearing his throat. "Lieutenant Chandler, today we formally recognize the extraordinary skill, courage, and leadership you demonstrated during the Echo 6 operation. Your actions directly saved the lives of a SEAL team trapped in hostile conditions. You operated with precision, patience, and unwavering integrity, qualities that set a standard for all of us." A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the room. Some officers nodded, some clapped, and a few shifted uncomfortably, confronted by the undeniable truth of her accomplishments. Ava remained composed, allowing the words to sink in. A commendation certificate was presented to her, accompanied by a medal. As she accepted it, she thought of the long nights spent alone on the ridge, the meticulous documentation, the patience and perseverance required to overcome doubt. This moment was the culmination of her struggle, but also the beginning of something larger. A shift in perception, a reminder that courage and competence transcend expectations. Lieutenant Harris stepped forward from the back of the room. A faint, smile on his face. Well done, Chandler. Not just out there, but here too. You've earned every bit of this, and more importantly, you've earned our respect. Ava allowed herself a small smile. Thank you. That means more than you know. After the formalities, she returned to her quarters, the weight of weeks of tension beginning to lift. She sat at her desk, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had been underestimated, mocked, and ignored. She had faced institutional resistance and subtle prejudice. But through it all, she had remained steadfast, relying on skill, precision, and moral clarity to navigate every challenge. Her thoughts drifted to the SEAL team she had saved. She had acted in the shadows, unseen and unacknowledged, yet their lives had depended on her courage. She realized that true heroism often exists outside of recognition, in moments when integrity and skill are tested against adversity. That evening, Ava walked the perimeter of the base once more. The sky was a canvas of deep blues and purples, the stars beginning to pierce the twilight. The ridge behind her held memories of tension, danger, and triumph. She stood there, taking a deep breath, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a mission fulfilled, justice earned, and respect won. In the days that followed, Ava's story became a point of inspiration on the base. New recruits sought her guidance, and even those who had once doubted her approached with respect. She continued to train, mentor, and lead, her influence extending beyond her immediate duties. Her actions had not only saved lives, but had begun to shift the culture of the institution itself, reminding everyone that courage, skill, and integrity could not be confined by bias or expectation. And yet, Ava remained humble. She understood that heroism was not about medals or recognition, but about action, patience, and responsibility. She had faced doubt, prejudice, and bureaucratic hurdles, and emerged stronger. She had proven that skill and courage are measured not by appearances, but by what one does when the stakes are highest. As the sun rose over Ridgefield, painting the base in soft morning light, Ava Chandler stood at the ridge once more. The town lay quiet below, unaware of the battles fought and won in shadows. She knew more challenges would come, more obstacles, more moments demanding courage and precision. But she was ready. She had turned the tide once from the darkness, and she would do it again if necessary. This time, however, she knew that her actions were no longer invisible, that her integrity had left an indelible mark. The system had acknowledged her, respect had been earned, and truth had been exposed. Ava Chandler, brave, resilient, and unwavering, smiled quietly to herself. From the shadows, she had become a force impossible to ignore. The night had tested her. The system had tested her. And she had emerged triumphant, not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of courage, persistence, and the undeniable power of truth. The ridge was silent, the stars gleaming above, and in that silence, Ava felt the profound satisfaction of a journey completed, justice served, and respect finally, undeniably, won.